Welcome everybody to a special edition of UFO Man Live. I'm Tim, or UFO Man, and to my side is my co-host and my friend, Tommy Highway. Tommy, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the UFO Man channel.
Hello, folks. I'm Tommy Highway, and I just want to give you a little bit of our mission statement, if you will. Our mission at the UFO Man Network is to bring about disclosure through investigations and collaborations with other ufologists, and of course you, the people that are witnessing these unexplained phenomena. Our channel is dedicated to reviewing data and sightings from all over the world of unexplained phenomena, including video and eyewitness accounts. Each week we post videos that were submitted to us by the public or provided to us by other reliable sources. These videos are put through a process to either authenticate or debunk each sighting whenever possible. We at the UFO Man Network believe that the truth really is out there, and that each of us possesses a very small piece of a very large puzzle. The more of these pieces that we can connect gets us that much closer to our ultimate goal of complete and full disclosure.
Tommy, could you please introduce our special guest?
Absolutely, folks. We have a wonderful guest for you tonight. His name is Paul Hynek, and Paul is the son of J. Allen Hynek, an American astronomer best known for investigations of unidentified flying objects for the U.S. Air Force. He is the chairman of the Advisory Board of MUFON, a consultant on History Channel's Project Blue Book, and a frequent speaker on the subject. He's a Wharton MBA and a professor of business at Pepperdine University. Paul has the most documented success in history in life extension, as demonstrated in a recent published article. Paul will share his unique take on his father, UFOs, and where they came from. Folks, it is my honor, it's our pleasure to bring you Paul Hynek. Paul?
Hi, guys. How are you? Nice to be here.
Thank you.
Welcome. Paul, I have a question for you. The question I have for you tonight, the first one off the bat is, what was the catalyst that got you into this subject matter? Can you elaborate?
Birth.
You mean birthing into the family with J. Allen Hynek?
Yeah, here's my associate here. It's a family business, right? Right. I don't remember. I can't imagine life without UFOs. From every point of view, we had flying saucer ornaments on the Christmas tree. They were really sort of woven into the fabric of most of the strands of my life and the lives of my 4 siblings.
Wow. Okay, Tommy?
That's fantastic. You're going to be part of the Contact in the Desert this year, Paul, and we were just hoping that you kind of give us a sort of a sneak peek on what you're going to be bringing to the table, so to speak.
Yeah, it's going to be a free-form interview on some of my research interests and my particular interest and leaning as to where UFOs actually come from.
Fantastic.
Going past the are there UFOs, et cetera, to where are they from and what do they want?
Right. Okay. We wanna get more into that. Is there any way you can present part of that here and let us know what you think in regards to where they come from and what are they?
Right. And let me disclaim that by saying that I think most of the people, you guys and most of the people listening probably have ideas along those lines. And I don't pretend to know anything more than anybody else, but I'll tell you what my father felt and what Jacques Vallée and others have felt, and that I feel, and that what I'm doing about that now, but not at all claiming that this is any more true than anybody else's belief. In fact, I think what may be the answer is that it's multivariate, that there are different origins for the phenomena. I mean, assuming that the phenomena is real, as I think we all do believe, that we accept the weight of the evidence, I think there are different explanations for what we consider bona fide cases, just like there are many explanations for the 95% or so of cases that become IFOs.
Right, identified.
Right. So my father was a nuts and bolts astrophysicist, and he thought that a nuts and bolts craft manned either by a biological or some kind of synthetic being from another planet was rather improbable. First, if you map the continental United States compared to the known universe, then the size of the Earth is like a speck of dust in Kansas. So even though we've been beaming out episodes of I Love Lucy these many years, it's a non-trivial challenge just to find us. Then if you find us, why would you come here? I believe in the singularity, the concept, the use of the term in artificial intelligence to mean when artificial intelligence becomes self-aware, becomes sentient and recursively self-improving. I believe more in a Ray Kurzweil benevolent view of that, which we can talk about if you like. But I think that any civilization who's going to progress along the lines of technology as we would recognize it would need to have a singularity event to be able to do, effectively and viably interstellar travel. If they achieve that singularity, there is nothing here that they either need or are concerned about. They don't need our air. They don't need our water. They don't need our gold. I don't think they're interested in our non-Borg-like individual concept of love. And I don't think they really care about what we do with nuclear power plants, although there are a lot of sightings around nuclear power plants. So then you have the fact that to get here, you kind of have to at least tweak Einstein in the nose. And we have very sensitive instruments that detect objects entering and leaving our atmosphere. And we don't seem to have correlating reports along with sightings. Then, my father talked about sort of like the Cheshire cat nature of some sightings, where you see a craft here and then it's gone and it's over here, that don't seem to obey our knowledge of the laws of physics. And they seem very comfortable in our gravity and our atmosphere. So as a bucket of challenges to sort of the knee-jerk extraterrestrial hypothesis, that's a pretty strong rationale for why extraterrestrial is either not the answer or not the total answer. And indeed, Jacques Vallée, said, look, if when all is said and done, the sum total of explanation for UFOs is extraterrestrial, he'd be disappointed.
Correct. I actually saw that comment and heard that from Jacques Vallée. What I want to say is they're considering the fact that UFOs may not necessarily be just from space, but interdimensional, extra-dimensional. They're looking at string theory and quantum physics and a whole bunch of different avenues. And so it could be even outside our realm of knowledge where they're coming from.
Yeah. And, you mentioned interdimensional. That's my provenance theory of choice, because it neatly addresses what I think are the three most important questions. One is, how do they know about us? Two is, how do they get here? And three is, why do they care? If it comes down to our interdimensional cousins, let's say, well, they're already kind of here or here adjacent, right?
Right.
And if they have some technology to do like some kind of portal that explains that, and there's no long space voyage with radiation, et cetera, and if they are related to us through the interdimensional family tree, that also explains why they would care about us, because they are perhaps essentially us.
I've also thought that the way they appear in the sky and then blink out and blink back in almost indicates an interdimensional travel.
Right. And there have been some interesting reports of people in Tehran questioned who talked about like a different president, or who had clothing on that had a designer that's not known. And they were just like a little bit off, which seemed to be consistent with a slightly different dimension.
Right. And I've actually heard that sometimes when the dimensions are traveled, that it can actually change our timeline.
Wow. Okay. That's pretty trippy.
Yeah, that is trippy. But anyways, that's just something I wanted to throw out there. Okay. Tommy?
Well, the interesting thing is that, again, we have next to no information on what we're looking at here. I mean, the only thing that we could really gather was from personal observations and things that we've gotten from the government, what they've actually been able to release. And when I say that, I'm talking about in terms of the general population. Right. So we don't really have very much to go off of. But what I could say is that right now, I read a little excerpt just before the show talking about the report that's supposed to be dropped. Well, apparently Congress has already been, or several congressmen have already been given some of this information, and they're coming out and basically bringing the whole thing toward it's an adversarial vehicle or something like that. They seem to be leaving out the logic that if it is in fact an adversarial vehicle like China or Russia, that they must have had this technology for an awfully long time, and we're talking about 100 years thereabout. So, me personally, I'm not really getting with the theory that these things are going to be one of our adversaries. I'm not going for that. I think we're looking at something else. Now, they seem to be able to travel through water. They seem to be able to jump into space effortlessly. So, are we looking at something interdimensional? That's a great possibility, and frankly, as good a theory as any when it comes right down to it. Or are we looking at, for some reason, not only have we been visited by someone else from another star system or whatever, but this has been happening for a long time. And the other thing that really gets my goat, I guess I could say, about trying to take this report to an adversarial tone is that not only do they, apparently China or Russia possess fleets of these vehicles that have some sort of field propulsion system, but they also have untold makes and models of them as well. Because we've got photographs, we've got eyewitness reports, things of that nature, and a lot of these things are. I mean, I just can't get my mind around if you have this technology, you might have one or two of these craft. I don't see a fleet of 100 of them, 50 of them, and I don't see every make and model out there. Tim, what are your thoughts?
Right, Congressman Burchett came out today and made a public statement where he said it's utterly ridiculous if you're considering that as a foreign adversarial technology such as Russia or China, because they just haven't had the ability to create fleets of these objects. Now, maybe one or two is possible, but not fleets. And I do know that Russia has several patents out for interstellar craft, but they are not fleets. And the other thing he said was for people to consider it a foreign adversarial power, you would have to consider that these vehicles being spotted are probably 1,000 years ahead of us. So for the Russians to get 1,000 years ahead of us, or China to get 1,000 years ahead of us in 100 years' time would be utterly impossible. So that came out today. That was a congressional statement. Tommy?
Well, let's ask Paul. Paul, what are your thoughts, I should say, on the report that's about to come out, and I guess what are you expecting?
Well, let's pick up that thread of adversarial technology. I whether it's China or Russia or interstellar, and it's an adversary, people wonder a lot: are aliens hostile?
Right.
If you're walking down the street and you see two dogs going at it, if you have to ask, are they playing or are they fighting? They are playing. When two dogs are fighting, nobody says, oh, are they fighting? It's obvious.
Right.
If aliens are coming here from another dimension, from another country, from another planet, from our future, and they mean us bad, they have clearly technological superiority over us to a degree that we could not possibly combat them. So if they're hostile, we would know it. So at worst, they're maybe manipulating and hybrid breeding, which I find rather implausible, but they're certainly not hostile in a war of the world sense. And if China or Russia or whoever reverse engineered or collaborated with the renegade Pleiadians using their dark telepathic chatter to communicate and came up with an airship, let's say, that can do these things, why would they just do it so that we can see it every now and then and then return it to base. No, they would use it to occupy us. If they're an adversary, that's what adversaries do. They don't just do bizarre things where you don't even know who it was. It would be dragging a banner behind it saying, "Hello from Beijing."
Sure.
Right, exactly.
Sure.
They take over our country, exactly. And not just our country, but the world.
Yeah.
My thought's always been you'd also see that type of power source and technology in their economic sector as well, and which we're not seeing. They're still using the same old power sources that humanity's been using forever.
Yeah, and for me, it's there could well be alien bodies or craft in hangars somewhere, but those secrets are really hard to keep. Now, we've got some people that said they've seen them. I don't find them altogether that credible, and I think that I lean towards that we don't really have that kind of smoking gun. That doesn't mean that the phenomena doesn't exist. It's just that I think there would be more sort of telltale crumbs by this time if we had been for decades in possession of aliens and or crafts.
Tommy, talk about what you know about what's over at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Well, growing up in that area, it was something that, again, this is the 70s, and I'm in grade school, but this was a big subject. I mean, everybody that you talked to knew something. They had a theory about Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, what's going on there. My teachers in school, I mean, everybody. This was literally a big thing. But the rumor that really kind of, I guess, stood the test of time was that Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, what you see on the top, and it's a pretty sprawling complex, but underneath is where the real story is. And several floors under there, their specialty at Wright-Pat is to reverse engineer equipment. And we're talking about Russian MiGs, things of that nature. So the theory is, and the rumor again, why Wright-Patterson Air Force Base became what it is because when the crash at Roswell actually took place, and I've interviewed 150 people in Roswell a few months ago, they're pretty sure it happened. But supposedly that wreckage was actually moved to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And there's also supposedly a cryogenic floor up underneath in there somewhere where they're actually keeping the bodies and things like that in some sort of a cryogenic state. Now, again, all that's rumor and all that, but that one right there really stood the test of time. And I bet if you went there today and asked somebody, they'd tell you the same story.
So I have an interesting riff on that, Tommy. So for Project Blue Book, we're doing an interview with Lieutenant Colonel Robert Friend, who was the last surviving Air Force director of Project Blue Book. And he's a fantastic man, and I can tell you some really interesting stories about him. He was asked, and he was a military man, and he was loyal to his military code. He was asked, were alien bodies ever taken to Wright-Pat? His answer was, no. Alien bodies wouldn't be taken to Wright-Pat. That's a mechanics base. They'd be taken to Fort Hood, which is a burn base. Now notice, clearly, the spirit of the question is, did you see alien bodies? I don't really care where they were taken. Did you see alien bodies? Mm-hmm. That's what they'd like to have answered. But he went with the military protocol, and he talked about where they would have been taken without, violating his oath.
His NDA.
Yeah. I found that fascinating.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, because that almost insinuates the possibility of them being taken there. Doesn't say that they were, but
yeah. And I asked him shortly before he died. I was with him on his 99th birthday party, and I told him a joke about George Burns, who had been famous for wanting to live to be 100 years old. And some woman asked George Burns, "But Mr. Burns, who really wants to be 100 years old?" And George Burns said, "Someone who's 99. So I told that to Robert Friend, and he loved that. And then I leaned over to him when nobody was watching. I said, "Lieutenant Colonel, I'm just your partner's son. You can tell me, did you ever see anything that convinced you?" And he looks around, his eyes sparkle, and he looks at me and he says, "Yes." I figured that was the most I could get out of him. And then we were planning to go to his house shortly thereafter. but he passed away.
But just to get that little bit of information out of the man was groundbreaking.
Pretty major confirmation, I'd say.
Confirmation, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So from somebody with a front row center seat, perhaps even a row ahead of my father.
Wow.
Outstanding.
Can you elaborate a little bit on the research that your father did for Project Blue Book and how he kind of went from being an astronomer into becoming the head of Project Blue Book?
Yeah, and I would hasten to say that he didn't go from an astronomer; he stayed an astronomer.
Okay.
Right, because I mean, UFOs were really his side hustle, in today's parlance. He was an astronomer, he was a scientist, and he did all kinds of astronomical endeavors. I think he had no idea when he was asked by the Air Force to study flying saucers, as they were then called, that it would be more than a couple weekends worth of work, much less that his bratty fourth-born child would be sitting here talking to you guys, decades later about it. When he was asked to, he didn't think much of the flying saucer phenomena. And he didn't, I wouldn't say that he came to believe them, because I don't think scientists really traffic with the word believe. I think it's more that he came to accept the weight of the data, not from one particular case, but from the accumulated weight of the data from which really compelling patterns emerged. So,
right.
He uses astronomical training and his knowledge to go along with, let's say, a half-hearted Air Force attempt to get to the bottom of the truth. Somebody once remarked that Project Blue Book was actually the Society for the Explanation of the Uninvestigated. So by that, it's meant that Project Blue Book was not really a scientific endeavor to uncover the truth. It was a public relations exercise to tamp down hysteria about the phenomena of little green men and ray guns and flying saucers.
Yeah, I always thought it was a public front to more or less defer people from the subject matter by doing what you just said.
Yeah. And, if you think about the Air Force, they've several responsibilities. One, project superiority in the air, defend against the projection of adversarial superiority in the air, but also to create and maintain the impression that they have us covered, that they have our backs. So if you've got a increasingly large swath of the citizenry bemoaning UFOs and aliens, that draws into question the Air Force's capabilities. Now, today's Navy doesn't seem to have that same compunction, perhaps because the water is their responsibility, and if they say they see things in the air, it's really okay.
Right.
But so for the Air Force, I think it's a perfectly legitimate endeavor to discredit the UFO phenomena. Now, they went to great lengths with actually debunking and lying and myths and disinformation campaigns. But especially after 1953, when we had the Robertson panel and the creation of the Air Intelligence Service Squadrons, which are really like the crash retrievals. And by crash, it could be anything. You mentioned MiGs before, Tommy, or Russian planes. So at that point, it was clearly that it was a public relations exercise. My father, was criticized for staying involved and lending some kind of academic legitimacy to the affair. But he felt that being there and having some influence over which cases were investigated and how they were investigated, and being right there with all the data was worthwhile.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Made a big impact on me as I was growing up. Project Blue Book. I mean, it gave me some clarification to what I've seen in my past. So, yeah, I think your kitty wants to be part of the show.
Yeah, that's the sound she makes when she's about to have an event. Yeah, sorry.
That's all right.
I think we may be being attacked now. That may be the warning system. The perimeter is in violation.
Yeah, you never know. people in the chat room have been asking me, do you think that we will ever know the truth?
Wow. Where's my crystal ball? So that's disclosure. And I believe that there won't be the signal event that we used to talk about, a flying saucer landing on the lawn of the White House at 12 noon on a Monday afternoon, and Walter Cronkite narrating the affair. One of the interesting things about disclosure now is, let's say the U.S. government, through a military branch or just the executive branch, said, yes, UFOs are real, we're in contact with them. Whatever they did, whatever kind of evidence they released, half the population wouldn't believe them. So disclosure has a bigger challenge now. But
Yes.
What I think may well happen is that disclosure is not an event, it's a process.
Right.
And you can certainly look to the recent Navy disclosures as reported by the newspaper of record, the New York Times, which historically poo-pooed UFOs, as constituting, a large amount of the sort of editorial schedule of a disclosure. But what I think may happen is that, I don't know, the days when we really look to the government for information that we believe may be past. And
Right.
that by the time that the government, either their hand is forced, Chris Mellon and others deserve credit for doing some of this.
Right.
Either their hand is forced or they deign to release more smoking gun type material. I think it will be to a population that has already made up their minds, and it won't really move the needle that much anyways, because they would be disclosing things to us and we already pretty much know what's going on.
Right. I think there just needs to be, a lot of people want just confirmation. They know what's going on for the most part. What do you think, Tommy?
I think that's an excellent point, Paul. I think that you're not going to be able to convince some of the people some of the time. It's just not going to happen. Unless something were to fall out of the sky into a public pool someplace, you're just not going to be able to convince those people. And those people have run around, they exist. Unfortunately, but then you have the other people like ourselves, people that have either had experiences or at least are open-minded enough to be able to accept the fact that this could be a possibility. And I think that's, to me, what this has done with all this disclosure talk and this talk of these videos that have been recently released and things like that, at least in a small sliver of the population's mind, it opened it up enough for them to actually contemplate the possibility, and that's a big step if you ask me.
Yeah, people will talk to me now on the street and well, yeah, they talk to me anyways, but what I mean is talk to me on the street about UFO sightings, whereas before they might have been a little closeted, not really revealing what they saw. They may not want to say who they are, blah, blah, blah. But I can ask somebody now and say, yeah, have you seen a UFO? And they'll go on and on about what they've seen. It's like the
completely different conversation.
The stigma is starting to lift.
Now it's more like of a cachet, right? That you've got some type of interest or involvement.
Right. I got involved. Sorry, Tommy. I got involved because I had a significant sighting, and I think that's the reason Tommy got involved. Tommy?
Absolutely. I had to write a book about my experience. The problem is, when I had my experience, I was a government employee, and I knew better than to come out with that because I wasn't involved in anything secret, UFOs or anything like that. It was more the IT side of things. To confide in any of my coworkers about this for fear of absolute ridicule, but I was also concerned about my career as well.
Sure.
So when I went back into the private sector, one of the very first things that I did was write a book about my experiences because I frankly couldn't contain it any longer. And I thought, why shouldn't my voice count too, I guess. So that's why I got into this.
I got into it because I had a significant sighting after, I'd say about, that would have been 14 years after I experienced trace evidence on my body, on my person, that involved an implant behind my ear, 2 suture marks that shouldn't have been there, a vaccination on my sternum, and bruises on my knees, both knees, and a pie-shaped burn on my right arm. And those made me start investigating alien abductions and abduction accounts. And then it kind of went silent for a few years. I saw lights in the distance, but I didn't see them up close. And then in 2009, I had a major sighting 50 feet away, 500 feet in the air with 12 people. So when that happened, that really pushed myself into creating the UFO Man channel and reaching out to other people globally to find out if they're seeing the same kind of thing and trying to capture that same event, which to this day I have been unable to do so. What I saw, I have never seen again. So for me, I'm a believer. And Tommy obviously is a believer as well in craft. Where they come from, what their agenda is unknown. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what people really want to know, is not that UFOs exist. We all know that already. What the thing is we want to know, are they hostile? Do they have an agenda? Are we safe in our beds at night? Can we walk down the street without being grabbed? You know, can we walk to the baseball game without being abducted? You know, that's what we want to know. Well, Tommy?
Paul, what are your thoughts on alien abduction? Do you have any opinion on
that? No firsthand knowledge that I know of, although I just remembered, Tommy, when you're sort of listing the catalog of insults to your body, kind of a weird thing I used to have in my knee that I just remembered now. Never really associated with UFOs. You know, I've talked to many people who have claimed to be abducted. Calvin Parker, for example, I just talked to a couple days ago. And there are stories, although to someone out on the outside looking in, being outlandish, you know, Calvin Parker and, you know, Charlie Hickson's story has held up over time, and more witnesses have come to the pub, you know, to the fore to corroborate parts of their encounter. So, you know, also my father would look at the credibility of the witness and the motivation. You know, Tommy, you mentioned that it really wasn't a fast track to career advancement for you while being a government worker to talk about a UFO encounter. There's a lot of people who have reported being abducted that it really didn't help them. You know, I think about Barney and Betty Hill, right? In the 50s, 60s, you know, an interracial couple, a black man and a white woman. They're not really the people in that time that want to draw a lot of public attention to themselves.
Right. Yep,
and then something as far out and, you know, with as much stigma back then as UFOs, claiming they've been abducted, you have to think.
Yeah,
because
wow.
by all accounts, they were intelligent people. And, you know, we have Kathleen Marsden, you know, Betty's niece, that they knew kind of the fallout that would occur from that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So, but yet they went ahead, and I think courageously shared, like you did, Tommy, their story. And for me, that's so much, is it more so than sometimes the physical evidence, is the motivation of people involved. And there are just so many people that I find, I don't believe that they're lying. I believe that they were in possession of their faculties at the time. And I don't believe that they see a lot of profit coming from claiming this. Right. You add those together and you do it for more than one, but hundreds and thousands of people. And it's hard to sort of dismiss abduction with a broad stroke, as has been done before.
Mm-hmm.
Well, considering that there are abductions in the jungles of Africa where there's no technology, okay, and they have no idea or concept of UFOs or aliens, and they match the type of abductions that are occurring here in the U.S., almost identical with what people are seeing, what they're experiencing, and so on and so forth. That lends credence right there.
Well, we talk all the time about the ancient humans. We're talking about Aztecs, people like that. Now they're making carvings, stone carvings of a guy in a spacesuit. I mean, just things like that. Cave paintings where you've got things that look an awful lot like gray aliens. You've got things that look an awful lot like a flying saucer in the sky. These people had no concept of flight, of human flight. So, it makes you wonder, with the limited resources and no imagination that they had, why they would sit down and do these things if it wasn't the things that they were actually witnessing firsthand.
It's almost like somebody should come up with a logo that incorporates this notion of ancient people thinking of star people and aliens together, right?
Yeah, well, funny.
Yeah.
We actually did. Yeah, we were talking about Betty and Barney Hill just the other day when we interviewed Ralph Blumenthal. So, Betty and Barney Hill were very credible. I mean, there was trace evidence. His regression therapy was immensely disturbing.
Star map?
The star map was the key one. Mm-hmm. I mean, being that wasn't discovered till several years later by NASA.
And Paul's absolutely correct. And we also came to the same assessment that at the times that they were back then, an interracial couple was going to do everything they could to stay out of the limelight, to keep attention off of themselves, not draw it toward them. Totally agree.
And they drew it toward themselves.
Yeah, right. And it's not like they were thinking, oh, we can cash in on this by going to conferences and, going on talk shows. That really was not the calculus.
Right. They were there just to tell the truth and try to find some reason for why it happened to them. I mean, that's why I think most of us are doing this, is we're trying to find out the reasons behind why we were lucky enough to see these craft within 50 feet away, why we had trace evidence happen, why we had an implant, why we had missing time. I want to know.
It's interesting that you said lucky enough, Tim, because I know a lot of people feel that way, and others feel unlucky enough to have had some kind of often traumatic experience, as you know.
I meant lucky enough in a sarcastic manner, but yes.
Well, Paul, let me ask you this. After Blue Book, where did your father go from there? Did he actually stay interested in the subject, or did he just kind of let it go?
Oh, yeah. He never quit on UFOs. He founded the Center for UFO Studies, and he wrote his books on the subject using his knowledge from the Air Force, but being able to talk freely for a change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because then he wasn't restricted by an NDA and all this other stuff.
Right.
Center for UFO Studies, that's CUFOS. Yeah, I've seen that, and I've actually been over there. Did he make any new assessments other than scientific in regards to the UFO phenomenon?
Not sure how to answer that. I mean, his understanding of the phenomena certainly evolved over time.
Okay.
And I think he continued to refine towards, as we talked about, more of a sort of meta-terrestrial or interdimensional axis.
I guess I have a question for you, Paul. How do you define your belief in UFOs?
Great question.
Yeah, I would sort of ape my father. I'm not sure I ever heard him say this, but it's pretty much how I think my siblings and I feel that he approached the subject, that one, there is a bona fide phenomena. There's too much evidence to ignore, and you have to have an open mind. I think there are two kinds of people in the world: those that are okay with questions they can't answer, and those that do not wish to question answers. Right?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So with the UFO phenomena, if you're going to jump in you really have to be careful. You have to be comfortable, rather, with a lot of big, meaty questions you may not be able to answer, and just leave them unanswered.
Right.
So I think my father felt that when you're confronted with a new phenomena, don't keep your mind closed too long. But then when you do accept the validity or the potential of the phenomena, don't close your mind too early with the best available answer, because it may be too difficult or multivariate, as we mentioned. So I think my father felt, on the one hand, there is a phenomena, and I completely agree. Then where they're from or what it's about, or the wheres, plural, of where they're from, it's a whole different kettle of fish. And that goes more towards personal beliefs, because not nearly as much data. I mean, my father had the sort of crucial insight that by and large, he wasn't studying UFOs. He was studying UFO reports. And for a nuts and bolts astrophysicist, that meant a lot more touchy-feely, soft human psychology science than astrophysics. So he often felt, out of his depth in much of his work centering around questioning witnesses, because that's not what physicists do. That's not what they're trained to do. Mm-hmm. So I look at the phenomena, I say, yes, there's obviously a phenomena here. More and more solid evidence all the time. And I lean towards there being multiple answers to it. And I hope to be able to push the needle a little bit on at least one of those avenues.
Right. We have a question from the chat from UFO London. Question. Please, UFO man, do you think aliens are controlling the Mandela effect to change the human brain to evolve quicker? Lots of believers via that in the lady 5 years. I have no idea whether they're making the brain evolve quicker or not. I mean, I think that's a theory. What do you think, Paul?
I want to hear Tommy's take on that first.
Well, to be honest with you, not super sure about that. I was actually just kind of formulating a question here. And one of the questions that I was really kind of curious about, Paul, is you mentioned your siblings. Growing up with Dr. Hynek as your father, what was it like? I mean, did people know what was going on, what your father was into, and how did it affect your young life?
Okay, so first, not to give Lou from London short shrift, I don't know. Personally, I don't ascribe so much to the exceptionalism of our species to attract, let's say, especially extraterrestrials who would come here and either help or hinder us. I just don't see why they would do that. Again, right. If they're interdimensional, they may well have an interest. And certainly, people talk about, let's say, driverless cars and how they're afraid of them, and by extension about the computers taking over in a dystopian result like the Matrix or the Terminator.
Right.
I am far less concerned about the potential for artificial intelligence than I am about the reality of human stupidity. Maybe computers take over in 15 years, or Ray Kurzweil thinks 2036. I don't know if we'll make it until then.
Right.
It may be the best thing that ever happened to us, because we could use some brain tuning to evolve faster than biologically, because we're not doing whatever your political belief, we're not doing a great job with politics or the environment right now. We're not very good stewards of this orb that we're on. So right. I hope that you're right, Lou, or that perhaps that you believe that's what's happening, because we could use some help, I think. As for what my childhood was like, it was great. People have asked me and my siblings, were we teased? No, never teased about it. Anybody who knew, my father was known both for being a professor of astronomy. So, but then for UFOs, and anybody who knew about it thought it was super cool. So it was a really positive environment. And in our house, it was just really fun because we had wonderful discussions about science and UFOs, and well-known entertainment people and scientists and, let's say, ufologists and UFO witnesses come over for dinner.
Wow. So you've met probably a lot of significant ufologists over the
Yeah,
years.
yeah, I have.
That's good. What do you think of the concepts being perpetrated by Lou Elizondo?
So I know Lou, and I like him. One of the things he said that I really found intriguing is that the people he reported to had religious beliefs, and that these religious beliefs really colored what they felt about UFOs and how they felt they should treat the phenomena.
Right.
So it was, what he felt was really not a, hey, wow, we've got some money and some technology here, let's get to the bottom of this. Yay or nay, adversarial, interstellar, what can we do here? He felt in many ways it wasn't that environment at all, but that these things posed a threat, not necessarily to the national security of the country, but the belief systems that these top-level Pentagon people believed in.
Right. I actually saw that, yeah, where religion is a hindrance to disclosure. Yeah.
Well, I mean, let's talk about the possible implications. Let's say if we were to somehow get disclosure, a UFO crashes on a main street somewhere, whatever, everybody sees it, it can no longer be hidden. How bad would that be for human religion, let's say? Now,
the Catholic Church has gotten ahead of this by putting out an encyclical saying that they believe there is life elsewhere.
Yeah.
So they have no intention of being caught flat-footed by some smoking gun revelation that there are aliens, because then they can point to several official communiques saying, yep, we told you so.
Right.
Sure.
I think they have a telescope too, that they're watching things in space that are supposedly approaching Earth and have been for some time.
The Vatican.
Vatican.
Yeah, they're currently in possession of one of the best observatories on the planet right now. And you got to understand that's pretty ironic, considering these are folks that wouldn't even touch Galileo's telescope. They wouldn't look through it.
Right.
So,
And you think about it, however you like what they've done, they're rational people. And to them, Galileo represented a threat.
Right.
Aliens may represent a threat, but they can't control aliens if that's what they're doing, like they could Galileo. They can't imprison or give hemlock to interstellar visitors.
Right.
So by saying, yes, we believe in this, their belief system isn't at all invalidated by the increasing drumbeat of the disclosure schedule. And by being able to do investigations on their own, they can find out more, maybe keep that information secret. And think about that. Tommy, you mentioned how they have a great observatory. What if they are an agency that knows the most, or is in league with the agencies that know the most about UFOs? We think about like the Russian and the Chinese and the Soviet governments, but what does the Vatican really know? It's a fascinating thing to think about.
Absolutely. And a lot of these, like Lou Elizondo was talking about, the religious types in the military that have been some sort of a hindrance to this subject or whatever. But those are also usually the same kind of people that go to confession.
Right.
So who knows what these priests are hearing and these bishops and all of that. I mean, those guys actually, to your point, they might actually have all the information. They're just sitting on it. Who knows?
They might have the smoking gun. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. So Lou Elizondo, I've actually spoken to him like 3 times in an email recently, and we're trying to get him on the channel, but he's squeezing 36 hours out of a 24-hour day, so it's really difficult to get him right now. Mm-hmm. But we hope to bring him on the channel in the future. So everybody in the chat, if you're listening to this, we are working on that. Jeremy Corbell, do you think he's just a spokesperson for the media narrative, or do you think he has some credibility in this disclosure process?
Well, I know Jeremy as well. I think he's got credibility. I think he is a well-intentioned, intelligent, sincere guy who's trying to get to the bottom of it. Whether he's bringing evidence that you would consider trustworthy or viable is up to you to decide. But I think he's got good intentions.
I trust him. I just wanted to get your take on it. Tommy?
Well, I think he absolutely believes in what he's saying. Absolutely. I don't think that I don't think he's being deceptive in any kind of way. And he claims to have a lot more footage. In fact, I've heard tip of the iceberg from what he's been saying that he actually has possession of. So it sounds like he also has enough credibility. He's got some pretty good sources and some pretty good places to be able to get these leaked videos. I think he's doing a great job. Personally, I think that we need people like that. We need people that are unafraid. We need people that are logical and are willing to stand up and say, hey, what the hell is going on here? Just give us more information. And if you don't want to tell us what's going on, fine. Then just give us some more information and let us make up our own minds about it. At least
right. Don't hem-haw around the issue. And the problem with Lou Elizondo that I had was every time he spoke, he had to be very careful with his NDA. And when he did that, he kind of hem-hawed around the issue and didn't give us any specifics. And that's the problem.
That's like Robert Friend from Blue Book, right? It makes them no less credible, makes it a little bit frustrating perhaps that they don't just say, oh, by the way, this was this and this and this. They try to hint at it or nudge or suggest, to help you down the path without violating their oath. And, like Robert Friend, I think it's not just a matter of, the government coming after them, but it's their honor at stake. They promised not to disclose certain information. I think they take it seriously.
I'm aware of that. I guess the deal is, and I was in the service for 4 years, so I'm aware of NDAs. But what I'm going to say is, when someone comes out and beats a dead horse with the same narrative, it frustrates the American public because we're trying to find out information. And leading you down the path is a great thing if they're leading you down the path. But if they're saying the same thing over and over again and we're getting nowhere, then basically disclosure on the way that we want it is not happening. It's more or less we're at a standstill.
Although I think we can look at it, disclosure both for more information for people who are already on the spectrum, but also welcoming more people into the tent. And I think like Lou Elizondo, even perhaps saying the same thing, is a particularly effective emissary or ambassador to get more people into the tent because he's a pretty sober individual. And he comes across in a very credible way. So he may not, to your desire, Tim, take you that far along the journey, but he could well bring in a lot more people to take those first few steps.
Oh, yeah, I see that point. Yeah, he is bringing in a lot more people that didn't believe in the first place. And I have to give him credit for that. And I do believe what he's saying. It's just I want to know more. I'm like a lot of ufologists or people in the UFO community that really desire to know more than what we're being told. And it seems like they're leaning toward the foreign adversarial technologies threat to suppress it again. And Tommy and I were talking about Project Sign and Project Grudge the other day, and I was looking at Project Sign from 1948-49. And in 1949, Project Sign came out with an estimate of the situation. And the estimate of the situation is the same estimate they're using now. It's identical. So they're going to say, yes, it's a threat to national security and we can't disclose it. And then they're going to clamp down again and suppress it. Now, that's what we're worried about.
Well, and here's another wrinkle to this. And something that I recently learned. There are 3 levels or 3 buckets, let's say, of classification. There is sort of the White House and the executive branch, secret, top secret, super duper top secret, and all that. Then you have foreign espionage. And then you have nuclear secrets. And these are completely different buckets. The President of the United States has no access to nuclear-related secrets. There's no need for him to know, he or she, to know this stuff. So go to New Mexico, a hotbed of cases centered around the White Sands nuclear missile testing range and Trinity, right? Where we had, the atomic bombs being tested and actually deployed in World War II. So Roswell, Socorro, San Antonio, the site of a famous case written about by Paola Harris and Jacques Vallée in a recent book called Trinity. So the point is that the Atomic Energy Commission had purview around their base. And if there's a crash saucer anywhere near a nuclear base, it was then the Atomic Energy Commission's responsibility to maintain base security and to go out and snatch whatever they could find. Now, the successor agency to the Atomic Energy Commission is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So it sounds weird at first to say, hey, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission may have a bunch of secrets about UFOs. But given that history, it makes perfect sense. And their security system is P, Q, and R, R being the highest level of security. Let's say the president or Congress says, yep, we're done with this. We're going to release all the information. They're not getting the nuclear information, nor are they getting the foreign espionage classified information. And since a lot of these reports happen around nuclear bases, we could have a lot or perhaps even some of the juiciest information of all completely out of the reach of the United States Congress.
I've always believed that the United States government, the elected officials that we elect every 4 years, don't really have the clearance or the access to the information that we require.
Temporary employee. A president's only going to be in office for a maximum of 8 years, and then that person's gone. Whereas you could have people that are in the military that have been there, 30 years, 25, 30 years. It's really, I can see why the president maybe wouldn't be briefed on a lot of things because of that. Now, I'm not sure I agree with that, but I can see that that's the reality of it. Now, to me, this report that supposedly they're working on right now, I guess the way I look at that, just to go back and touch on that again, is I see an ideological battle going on in the American government, the Pentagon. And what I see here is that you've got a faction that wants to actually disclose all this information to the people, that think the people deserve that information. But then you've got the hardliners, the military types and all that are doing everything they can to keep this thing under wraps. And in my opinion, my humble opinion, I think that we're going to see who won that ideological battle when that report drops. I think it'll be a very good indicator.
Now, I heard something recently, Paul, and I don't know if you can confirm this or not. I heard it from several inside sources that I've been talking to as of late, ufologists you probably know, that have mentioned to me that the UFO report is going to drop on the 24th, not the 25th. And the reason is they want to commemorate the Kenneth Arnold sighting near Mount Rainier.
Who knows?
Do you know anything about that?
I do not.
Okay, well, keep your ear to the ground, because that's what we heard from some people that are high up in ufology, or at least I did. Tommy did not.
Okay, so maybe ear to the ground and eyes to the sky.
That's right.
There you go. Ear to the ground, eyes to the sky. Exactly. And that's what Tommy and I are going to do. And if that UFO report drops on the 24th, Tommy and I are going live, because we're going to cover it immediately. So if you're... Go ahead.
Sorry, one of the things about that is, as Chris Mellon has pointed out, you're expecting the agencies who have kept all this information secret for a long time to then disclose a lot of that. I don't know. I don't know how much they will actually disclose. I don't know if it'll be a qualitative step forward as opposed to, an iterative small step for mankind.
Right. We've been discussing this for a long time on the channel, and we have both said that 70 years of suppression cannot be covered in 180 days. It's just impossible.
And some language tucked in the back of a COVID relief bill, right? I just, I think, buy the rumor, sell the news.
Right.
Yeah. There you go. Great.
Right.
Yep.
So
there's also rumors that, and again, this is just sources that I have that they're stating things like, presidents have been getting a little bit more briefing since Bill Clinton on the subject. And I thought it was something very interesting that Donald Trump said, not so much what he said, but how he said it. He was being interviewed by his son and was asked about Roswell. And I mean, you could just look at his body language, and he pushed back on it, and he said, I can't tell you, but it's very interesting, things like that. I just thought his statement on it was different. But then you look at Bill Clinton, and Bill Clinton outright came out and said, listen, I've done everything I can do to try to get this information, and they won't tell me either. Who is they?
I think a lot of that goes back to the fact that the nuclear bucket is not going to talk to the president. Mm-hmm. So it's not a question of, you mentioned bureaucrats choosing to share that information. There's a whole lot of information, perhaps the best of it, that will never be disclosed to a sitting president.
Right. So then we probably won't get that information as a public either.
Yeah, until such point as the Nuclear Regulatory Commission or factions therein decide to release the information.
Which would be...
And it's hard to understand what their decision-making process would be.
Sure.
Right. Well, I do know that disclosure is not necessarily an event, but a process. And I agree with something that Lou Elizondo said. The UFO report is going to be an interim report. And hopefully the task force will no longer be a temporary group and be set up as a long-term research program, so that we can really get down to the bottom of this story and it doesn't go, it isn't left to just die off. We want to keep it going. And I think funding should be given from the government or from us or whoever to get that program going, because there is a significant amount of people that are increasing in the United States and elsewhere that want to know what is going on.
And we're tired of the swamp gas theory. We're tired of all of that, light reflecting off of the lighthouse 2,000 miles away from the sighting, blah, blah, blah. Enough of that. It's time to take this seriously. The stigma is beginning to become lifted off of it, the stink of it, if you will. In the last couple of months, I probably, when someone asks me, I hear you're on a UFO channel, and I'd be like, yeah, but now it doesn't sound as crazy as it did 2 months ago, because of all the information that's coming out and all of the attention that's being paid to, a real event. These are real occurrences that are being witnessed by real people. This is no longer the story told by a drunken hillbilly.
Right, exactly.
With all due respect and fondness for drunken hillbillies.
Right.
Last year in the summer of 2020, I was listening to ESPN radio, and they're talking about some football game. I just have it on the background. And one of the jock announcers asked his partner, hey, do you suppose that if there is a Super Bowl this year, that the winner will have an asterisk by their name because of this sort of interrupted season? And his partner, without skipping a beat, said, the only thing you need to know about 2020 is that the Pentagon has admitted that UFOs are real. Now, this permeated the zeitgeist of ESPN during a football discussion, and this guy felt comfortable enough and felt the need to just blurt that out on a Disney-owned channel in the middle of the day, breaking down NFL defenses.
That is awesome.
Outstanding. It's becoming more a part of the vernacular, more a part of people's everyday lives, because again, it's in the news, and even the media is not letting this thing go. They're on it like a rabid dog.
And think about, had COVID not happened, UFOs were a pretty big story, and they would have gotten a lot more ink and grabbed a lot more mind share had it not been for this, horrible pandemic.
Right, exactly. I think that UFOs are starting to gain ground, though. They're starting to gain more ground with the media. What with the New York Times article in 2017 and so on and so forth since then.
Well, you've got the United States Navy saying, we've seen hundreds of these things. We don't know what they are. We could use some help reporting them. And by the way, we're worried, we're concerned over the safety of our naval aviators. That's
Right.
a stunning admission from a branch of the United States military, and very much diametrically opposed to the stance that the Air Force took in my father's day.
Oh, absolutely.
From what I understand, the USS, is it the USS, not the Omaha, but the USS Russell had a whole bunch of helicopters that they can launch off the deck, and they do it at night. And that's why they're concerned about the multiple objects, because they do it under cover of darkness and they don't know if they're going to run into them. I saw that yesterday. They were talking about that. They're afraid for the safety of their helicopter pilots.
Anything in the sky that's not supposed to be there is certainly a navigational threat to aircraft.
Right, exactly.
Or potential threat, I should say. So, I mean, that makes sense. Absolutely. It just mystifies me that, I mean, this has been going on for so long. And again, it looks like once we started playing with nuclear energy, that's when things really took an uptick in terms of sightings and things of that nature. And it's almost like, well, like the Rendlesham base incident. You know, there's a UFO that's hovering over this base, being witnessed by several soldiers, officers, you name it. This thing's actually shining a beam of light into the nuclear bunkers that weren't supposed to be there in England. But the nuclear weapons, it's like, I know these are here. I'm pointing a light at these nuclear weapons. I mean, it defies. I mean, what do they want? What are they trying to tell us? You know, it's obvious there's some message there. What are your thoughts on that, Paul?
No idea. You know, as I mentioned, I don't see why they would care about us and our nuclear capabilities. And yet, my belief is sort of challenged by the number of cases where they seem to show an interest in our nuclear facilities. You just mentioned a great one. Mm-hmm. Or, you know, you can't, it's hard to think about a hotter hotbed than New Mexico, especially in the 1940s.
Sure.
Time and place that have a lot of significance for nuclear activities.
The Roswell economy is largely built on aliens, UFOs, and the fact that this crash occurred. I mean, you go there, I was just amazed. I knew it was going to be a little touristy, but I was just not prepared for the fact that, I mean, not only did they base their economy on this incident, they're real serious about it. And everybody that you talk to has a story. A lot of people have relatives that were involved in the crash one way or another, whether they witnessed it or whatever, they were part of the recovery team, something. And I'll tell you, it amazes me how, I mean, to these people, it's just like, oh yeah, so what? You know, the sun's going to come up tomorrow too. What's your point? They're that matter of fact about this event. So it's deeply rooted in their local culture, you know.
Right. It's not a shock to them, like people that don't step out of their daily box. You know, we've referred to this analogy multiple times on our channel. People live in a box, okay, and that box is get up in the morning, have breakfast, go to work, come home, have supper, play with the kids, go to bed, and repeat, pretty much. And they don't always step out of their box and look at a new paradigm. And now they are. They're starting to look. And I think, like you said, the pandemic really had people going out in their backyards more and looking up in the sky. And that's why we got more UFO footage. We've gotten a lot more sightings because people are filming them with their camera in their pocket.
Yep.
So we're seeing a lot more unidentified objects flying around, whether they be of alien origin or man-made. That's yet to be determined, but it's getting a lot more people into the UFO narrative.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Paul?
Well, I think for a lot of people, COVID was a reset on practices, beliefs, desires, goals, etc. You know, I'm speaking from although this desk doesn't look like it, a thoroughly COVID cleaned and reorganized house. And I think that people did a lot of house cleaning in both a literal and metaphysical sense. I think it had, people had a little bit more time on their hands because they're not commuting. And I think people gave a lot more cycles to topics that don't always have a clear-cut, direct impact on their daily life. And I think a lot of people, perhaps the majority of Americans, may think, UFOs are interesting. There's life elsewhere, and they may have come here, but that doesn't help me get my promotion at my job or get tenure or help pay for my kids' school, right? It just doesn't. I don't see the relevance or the help for me in going more in there. Yeah, it's fascinating, but I don't know what I can do about it, where I really go to learn more. And, I really need to get this report out tomorrow. I also think that, people have railed against science and this sort of firewall of dogma against heresy of UFOs or civilizations being more ancient than we think. I think a lot of that is just more prosaic, that there's not this cabal or organized opposition on the part of mainstream scientists. And it's just much more proletarian that if I'm an astronomer, I'm worried about getting that grant and about getting tenure and about doing this. And I hear lots of theories about some kind of new propulsion or a flying saucer or this or that or some other culture or, Oumuamua, some other, some strange object floating.
Right.
I just don't have time. I don't see, like we talked about, if you're a government worker, is your career going to be advanced by your account of UFO? Probably not.
Probably not.
And if you are a busy scientist, and scientists, for example, my father was an astrophysicist. People would ask him questions, and if it's outside the realm of astronomy, astrophysics, he's going to back off and say, I'm not trained. I mean, they're much more narrow and specialized than we think. And like the way my father is portrayed in the TV show Project Blue Book and elsewhere, they tend to portray scientists as being smart and knowledgeable about everything. But they're the first in the world to say, I don't know. So in addition to just being busy with what they have to do in their family and their career, a lot of scientists will just say, I'm simply not prepared to advance a knowledgeable viewpoint on that because it's outside of my wheelhouse, which they define a lot more narrowly than people might think.
Right.
Great point. Absolutely.
But that's a great way to state that, I would say. Science.
It's sort of the Occam's razor economist point of view. Look for the incentives, and there's not really a lot of incentives for most scientists to say, I'm picking up that UFO flag and we're going.
Right.
And you're right. Most scientists have a specialty as a rule. Every scientist isn't like the professor from Gilligan's Island who can, do all these wonderful things and make coconut radios and all that. Usually they have a specific field, a specific focus, and that's kind of the wheelhouse that they stay in, that's their comfort zone.
Right. And that's one of the things that I would mention in my consultations with the writers in the cast of Project Blue Book. There was one episode where the pre-production script had my father waxing knowledgeably about deep ocean currents. And I said, you would never catch him in a million years doing that. At best he might say, hey, I was interested in a kid in oceanography and here's some things I read about. But that's, if you think about it, deep sea ocean currents are the exact opposite of what he studied. And he would never claim to be a subject matter expert of any kind whatsoever, or about like Kentucky flora, for example.
Right. And I mean, they just, people just assume, and it's from the movies and television, all that again, scientists are all knowing, all brilliant or whatever, but a lot of these guys aren't. They're just focused.
Yeah. And right. And I think there are a couple of reasons. One is screenwriters tend to think that a smart scientist is way up on the spectrum and knows everything and is logical and a robot. That's not always the case. My father was a very warm man with an over fondness for puns. He loved jokes. He loved laughing. And, he was not some logical guy. He just liked science. He wanted to take a flashlight to the fringes of science and just push it a little bit farther. The other reason scientists, I think, are portrayed like that is that it just comes down to character economization. You don't have room to introduce another character to talk about the ocean. You've got a scientist there. He's smart. He should know. You just don't have time to bring another character.
Right. So tell us when your show is on and what times, if you want.
Well, the show ran for 2 seasons on history.
On history, okay. So we can be able to find that on YouTube then.
I think it's on Amazon now too.
Okay.
And and I just want to state for the record that it's not super creepy at all to have the supervillain from Game of Thrones play your TV father.
I'm sure it's perfectly normal. Happens every day.
Of course.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. The other thing I was going to let everybody know is that Paul Hynek is a featured participant in this year's Contact in the Desert, world's largest UFO conference, and that'll take place on June 25th through the 28th. If people are looking for virtual passes or information on the conference, please go to contactinthedesert.com. Had to get that out there.
Absolutely.
Another thing is Tommy Highway and myself will also be featured in Contact in the Desert. We're going to be in the host window and we're going to be in the Cosmic Cafe. So check us out. We'll be there as well.
We're graduating.
We're graduating. Yeah, we're graduating up. Thank goodness. Yeah, and next year we put our hat in the ring for a PowerPoint presentation. So we'll see about that. Mm-hmm. So maybe we'll be there with you, Paul.
Cool. Rock and roll.
Yeah. Any last comments, Tommy?
Just want to thank Paul very much for coming, sir. Thank you for your time. It's been a wonderful experience. Really, this guy's a super guy, folks. Backstage, he's a riot. Just a really nice guy. We're very honored that you came here and spent some time with us. Thank you for that. You've given some very interesting insight. Your father, again, your father is sort of the father of ufology in many ways. So, we appreciate that. And folks, we've also got some links that we're going to put up here for you real quick. If you want to go ahead and take these down, it's going to give you our contact information. That's our channel, our website. We've got a Patreon account. You can catch us on Facebook. We're out there on Twitter. You can go ahead and join our channel if you like. As a matter of fact, do us a big favor if you haven't already done so. Go ahead and hit that like button. We'd really appreciate it. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. That really helps us out with the YouTube algorithm. And Paul, do you have any last departing thoughts?
See you guys at Contact in the Desert.
Yeah, we'll see you there.
We'll be there.
And to everyone in the chat room, thank you for participating. And everybody who participated online, thank you as well. And as always, from Tommy and myself,